Today's forum was sort of a surprise for us, and one of those wonderful opportunities to both invite somebody to Humanist community and find out that she has something that she would like to offer to Humanist community. Marilyn Barry is recently moved to this area from Pennsylvania, and she came to our summer brunch back in June, and she had a good time. And she offered to share something that she's very involved in. And we're really excited that she's here to present something about transition movement and permaculture design. Marilyn Barry is a business consultant and administrative manager for Barry Consulting. Among other activities, she provides business project support for small nonprofit and private organizations. And she's a great humanist. So please welcome Marilyn Barry.
Thank you, Debbie. So, transition movement. I became familiar with this around the same time I became familiar with permaculture many years ago and dove into it headfirst in the Philadelphia area where I'm from. Basically, the transition town movement creates a blueprint for communities to shift from life dependent on oil to one that functions without it. That was the initial inception of it decades ago, mostly around England. Today, the transition movement, with or without the dependency on oil philosophy, it's a framework that allows for communities to be more sustainable and interactive. The Transition Town movement was basically founded on the permaculture structure, and permaculture teacher Rob Hopkins in 2005, who let loose the Great Unleashing, which was the launch of the Transition Town in Totnes, England. We'll see a little clip on that later. It's very interesting. Today, Transition Town is taken on by hundreds or possibly even thousands of people around the world. Back in Pennsylvania, in Delaware County, next to Chester County, there's the county seat of Media. And Media adopted the Transition Town movement probably 8 years ago, and I was very active in that initiation. It's wonderful because you see the municipal borough government interacting with this grassroots community. And you'll see as we go with the examples what that looks like. Back to permaculture is the foundation of the transition movement. There's 3 core tenets of permaculture. That's care for the earth, provision for all life systems to continue and multiply. This is the first principle because without a healthy earth, humans cannot flourish. Care for the people, humanism, provision for people to access those resources necessary for their existence, and a return of the surplus, reinvesting surpluses back into the system to provide for the first 2 ethics. This includes returning waste back into the system to recycle into usefulness. The third ethic is sometimes referred to as fair share, which reflects that each of us should take no more than what we need before we reinvest the surplus. Okay, so I'm going to give a little look into permaculture by Jeff Lawton. Bill Mollison was one of the initial founders of the permaculture terminology in Australia maybe 35 or 40 years ago. And Jeff Lawton is basically a second-generation teacher. He's one of my favorite teachers. He's traveled all over the world teaching. He has his own incredible permaculture farm in Australia. And his wife is from... she's Palestinian. So he did a little experiment near the Dead Sea area where nothing grew. The soil, sand is very saline. The engineers in that area said, oh, nothing can grow here because of the aridity, the heat, the whole bit. So here's a very cool little extreme example of. Okay, so the focus of permaculture is not on each separate element, but rather on relationships. Again, think community, humanism, created among elements by the way they are placed together. It's a guild. The whole becomes greater, stronger, better than the sum of its parts. And I'll go again to a botanical example where in Oregon, there's mats of microorganisms, fungi, microfungi that actually feed all the trees and other plants in, 100, I see head shaking, over 100 square mile area or more. So even there's interrelationship and interdependence. People in permaculture. Permaculture uses observation of nature to create regenerative systems in nature, but also structures of communities, finances, spirit, etc. That looks different ways in different communities, whether it's an urban community or a rural community or Indian reservation. And it's like a self-evolving database. There's no one set structure. It can be whatever the community needs and wants. The principles of permaculture can be used as effectively to create vibrant, healthy, and productive people and communities as they have been in landscapes. Okay, back to transition town movement. Why? Originally, what happens when oil runs out or is disrupted? Now, how do we build sustainable communities regardless of oil? If we wait for government to act on issues such as climate change, we'll be waiting forever. I think we're seeing that. If we only act as individuals, that's too little. Progress builds more rapidly with community grassroots efforts. Transition town, how? The aim of transition is to try to relocalize economy where it's happening versus globalize it, and be a catalyst for the process of intentional relocalization. The plan? Split life up into categories initially: energy, food, currency, transportation, homes, all of which had their own solutions. Individual communities interpret transition whatever works best for them. Work together as communities where real change will happen. Transition is ground up. It's about people doing the work for themselves, so culture has to change first. I'll go back to the media, Pennsylvania example. Initially, we started with a time bank, and the time bank could have been on paper or just an honor system or on software. Maybe I did 1 hour of permaculture design for somebody, and somebody else did something else completely different, knitted something for me for 2 hours. So now I have a credit of 1 hour and a debit of 2 hours. And we tracked all this on a time software, and people were getting haircuts, and an engineer, like a civil engineer, was actually putting rope swings up for people. That was his so it doesn't have to do anything with your personal profession. It can be your personal interests. We also did things together as community. We did skill sharing. We would harvest tomatoes and together or separately, and we would go to somebody's house and do canning together. I learned how to do a little crocheting. It can also be anything along electronics. Maybe somebody was helping teach something on electronic software. So it was so important because I got to know people in that community. I didn't even live in that county. I was a county away in Chester County, and yet we were still building community. So it doesn't have to be there in that town. And then we realized people were moving in from other states to go live in Media, Pennsylvania, just because they had a transition town. It's so cool. And the municipal government was giving us space to hold functions, and it got to the point where they also now have added a free store. So one of the churches in the town had a little extra space, and Transition Town Media pays them a little bit of money from donations, and people just bring things, chairs, furniture, anything but clothing, for free, and people come and take whatever they want for free. So you can whatever you want to do. It's amazing. So I have a free store, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. Okay, so culture is changing dramatically there. So now I'm going to show you a very cool little clip by Rob Hopkins at TED Exeter. Again, he was one of the initiators in Totnes, and you'll enjoy that. So that was a really good, the best example of what's happening with eco-villages, which is what they're moving towards in Transition Town. Currency, local currency, as Rob mentioned, is central to the transition plan. That looks like local dollars, which we see actually a good bit of in different parts of the East Coast, Northeast. Credit unions, electronic means of transactions, time bank, as I mentioned. I also want to talk about localizing currency. The State Bank of, I believe, North Dakota is very much owned by the people, and that was one of the only banks in the country. It's a very good size, was not affected by the big bank implosion. So again, localizing currency, even in a more traditional sense, can be very, very healthy. Food, examples that you can order weekly groceries online and collect it on a Saturday from the local school. So these are from the area, not from China and all over the world. Fruit and nut trees can be grown around town for anyone to pick from. How great is that for everyone? Children, elderly, homeless, all of us. Lawns and lots are turned into food production. Big surprise for me coming out here in the last couple of months was the amount of hardscaping I see around houses and an amount of grass, knowing that there was a drought for years. I do occasionally see the xeriscaping, the plants that take very little water. But I also very occasionally see lawns that are turned to food production. Hardscaping actually contributes to global warming because it's basically a solar passive solar collector, and grass, of course, takes water, which there isn't a lot of around here. So when you actually plant different types of plants, it retains the moisture, as we saw in that very extreme example with the garden in the desert. You can actually stabilize water systems and lower the temperature in the microclimate area. So that's very, very critical and something that anybody can do. Some of you may be thinking, wow, that's really great, but we can't do that here. Well, there are some things we can do. Also, your buying choices. I love Trader Joe's, unfortunately. It's actually a German-owned company, so that's not a local currency. Yes, they do employ local people, but it's different from maybe going to Sprouts or Molly something or others, which is more of a regional store, I believe. Not saying not to shop here or there, but if you want to do something to help, try to shop local business, local providers, local co-ops. If you have a yard, there's people that can be found that would love to garden in your yard, give you some of the produce, and then they sell the rest of it off or they give it to food banks. So no work, no sweat equity for you, just there's your lawn and it can be put to good use. Energy, community ownership of renewable energy, including wind and solar. That's very big in parts of the country. And then we have the final quick little, does anybody have any questions before I go into this final little phase here? Just a few minutes. I see the man with a microphone. No questions, thoughts, ideas, feedback? Okay. All right, so this is the final, just a few minutes, transition in 5 minutes. So, yeah, insert any word that you want in there, faith groups, meetup groups, humanist groups, any groups that already exist. It's just leveraging the energy of each other. And that concludes Transition Town Movement with the underlayment of permaculture. If anybody has any questions, I'm available afterwards.
Anyone with questions, raise your hands.
The mic works.
It seems that contrary to this movement, most of migration is into urban areas and away from small towns. Isn't there going to have to be a complete reversal of our culture to counteract this movement?
Specific to transition town, it can be transition street, it can be transition village, it can be transition city, it can be a transition block, which I've actually seen in the Berkeley area with some intentional communities. And the intentional communities up in the Northeast Bay Area, they don't even necessarily live physically right next to each other, but they're building this sort of communal efforts towards these various skill building and urban gardening and things like that. So if the migration is into the cities, just as well. it's fine. There's all sorts of things you can do with vertical gardening and taking over vacant lots. We see a lot of that in the Philadelphia, D.C., New York area. There's so much that can be done with communities and cities. So it's all good. Or even a wide open Indian reservation, like I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a fascinating talk and this topic. And my question is, do you see any interest to this here in this state, in Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, at any level to like implementing this idea? So
To implement Transition Town?
Yes.
Again, around the Berkeley area, if anything, there's more towards that. I haven't really found anyone like me yet. I haven't spent a lot of time up in Berkeley yet, but I think there's a lot more activity going on, surprisingly, that I found in the Northeast, Vermont, Philadelphia, and so forth. But I've been looking for full-time work, so and working full-time as well. So I've been very, very busy with just day-to-day activities. But before I did my research, before I came out here, I did see Transition Town, the Bay or something like that, but I don't see a lot of actual activity yet. So one reason why I wanted to do this today is to sort of raise awareness, and people that are interested will find ways to get involved, even starting something themselves, on their own street. It doesn't. Go ahead.
I know at least one group which would be very interested.
Yeah, there are permaculture groups here in the area, but they seem to be doing a lot of reading instead of doing. And then there's people that are doing, like in the intentional housing communities, even the informal ones, but it's very much in those little pockets. But I think there's a lot of hope here. Yeah.
Hi, back here. A lot of what you were talking about on an individual basis has been around, you're probably familiar with Small is Beautiful, Schumacher's work in the 60s. He's talking about all those kinds of things way back then already. Mm-hmm. On a broader scale, your third tenet was fair share. Now, on that broader scale, when we think of communities like Westchester County, Lower Connecticut, Greenwich,
Very wealthy.
Silicon Valley.
Very wealthy.
Yeah, I thought your point about, the lawns, not to mention golf courses, how do you achieve fair share? What does that mean to these communities of great masses of their share as opposed to the rest of the world and people? And does that mean distribution? Redistribution?
So again, I'll go back to media in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. There's people there that are very affluent, highly educated people making great income, and there's people that aren't, just like here. So it's a matter of people at no matter what their socioeconomic, educational levels getting involved. And in media, we see people that are very needy that come into the free store and take things, and people that are not needy, or maybe they are, but they have stuff that they don't need, they're giving to the free store. And food also comes into the free store. There's nonprofits around the Philadelphia area that actually glean from leftover food from caterers, restaurants, and so forth, and give it to the homeless. So I think the point here is it has to be we doing this. We are the cavalry. It isn't coming from top down. It's not waiting for the government or a municipality. They're overwhelmed and under budgeted and so forth. So this is all about grassroots, everyone here in this room, and that anyone that has interest, doing whatever they can wherever they can.
Go ahead.
Hi, Debbie. Marilyn. Really enjoyed the talk. I've sort of been a fan of this kind of movement for a long time, intentional community. When I first came here, I was interested in co-housing, and I found the challenge of trying to get this was about 20 years ago, and to get co-housing to take off over here, the local communities are very tight in what they can allow and don't allow. So I really enjoyed the way you presented this stuff. There are a lot of these informal, what I call transition communities in the area. We near my place, just down the street from here, less than a mile, we have a farm to table where it's a community garden that people grow stuff and sell to the neighbors, and all over San Jose. Oakland has a lot of, and this local movement. The Oakland has a very large local flavor which they're trying to propagate using local communities and things like that. So I think it's slowly getting some traction. And thank you for making this.
Absolutely.
Giving this talk.
Yeah, I actually, I've been living temporarily in Campbell, but I am working for the moment up in San Francisco. So I'm commuting from here to there, and it's making for a very long commute every day. So I'm actually looking at some of these little informal communities like Mid-Peninsula on up, for a room. But it can be just, 2 or 3 people in a house, because there's a lot of people share houses with either a homeowner or just co-renting together, but it can start there. So it doesn't even have to be a formal eco-village, which I've also been involved in back east, complete with architectural charrettes to make sure it was ecologically viable on the whole 9 yards. But it can be as simple can be to create, to go more towards that movement.
Yeah, there is a transition Palo Alto. Palo Alto is about 15 miles up the peninsula, and they have their own website. And also there is a website for all the transition towns around the world and also for the United States.
Yes.
So if you want to find out, and I believe there's several transition towns in the South Bay, though I don't know much about the others. And I know at least one eco-village, which is in San Mateo.
Nice. Thank you. Yes, there's a lot of information on the web in terms of Transition Town US and nationally, and the YouTubes are very, very, very helpful. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Bill Roush, and I live in a community of old folks, and most of whom are widows, and I was an engineer, and so I looked at things through an engineer's eyes, and we had a lot of people would like to go out in the sun, but it was very hot. So I talked to the staff, and I got 3 large umbrellas and put them out in the patio so that people could enjoy the summertime without being scorched.
Yeah.
So maybe this is just a small kind of...
You're building community.
Yes, that's
Very
right.
good.
So I thought I'd bring that up, and I'm always looking for other ideas to help the community.
Yeah. So it'd be nice if maybe somebody built some sort of trellis, and then you could grow like pea vines or something like that, so you have shade and food. That would be the next step. But that was a good start.
We do have lots of vegetation, but none for food at the moment.
Yeah. Hi.
You mentioned the end of cheap oil many times. It's interesting to note that the country that is most concerned about the end of cheap oil is Saudi Arabia. They know it's going to come to an end. It's a finite resource.
Yeah.
And they have put immense amount of money into preparing for that. Among those efforts was the founding of the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, called KAUST, on the Red Sea. You should look it up. It was endowed with $20 billion. I think it's the largest endowment of any university, second only to Harvard, maybe equal to Stanford, I don't know, but anyway, it's up there with all of them. And they are pursuing research related to renewable energy, photovoltaics, batteries,
Algae.
transmission, biofuels, etc. And not only are they doing that locally, and in order to attract the best brains to come, they have created on the Red Sea a mini city in which it's surrounded by a fence in which the usual laws of Saudi Arabia don't apply. Women can drive, They can dress as they like. Once they leave the boundaries, they're subjected to the laws of Saudi Arabia. In addition to funding and attracting the best brains to that research institution, they have identified people all over the world at places like Berkeley, Stanford, Caltech, MIT, who are doing this kind of research and giving them millions of dollars to pursue that research. So it's very interesting that they know that they have a vested interest in this.
Well, I appreciated very much, it's Arthur Jackson, I appreciated very much hearing your story. And to me, as you indicated several times, at one level, this is the core of humanism.
Yeah.
What's humanism really about? It's about people being together, supporting each other, drawing from each other, having community, and I'm glad you came here today to talk to us. I hope somehow we can figure out how to utilize the energy and the ideas you have to bring that deeper into the humanist community. Because I think all of us here believe in community, but maybe we believe about it in different ways, and we haven't been able to really energize, let's say, the heart and get the kind of connection you're talking about, which is very exciting.
Yeah. Well, you know, again, doing the skill sharing and any sharing of time, you know, they got together and they made books, you know, things that you wouldn't necessarily aspire to do, but just having that item to work on together, that project, is how community is built. So making the opportunity not to just sit and watch something, but to actually interact at each other's homes and hear, and, you know, maybe even do a vertical garden here. I don't know. There's always something. Yeah.
I'm Chip. I would not want to challenge, but there is something that's missing from the next step. The end of cheap oil is described as a problem, as though we're going to have the end of cheap energy. And I see the explosion coming in solar cells, and we are going to carpet this planet with enough solar cells to provide all our power needs. The end of cheap oil doesn't frighten me as much as it does industry. The end of cheap oil is a bad thing if you want to drive container ships across the ocean. But the power of this local community transition effort to provide their power needs locally suggests that solar cells are going to be a huge thing going forward for transition.
So I want to keep going back to in 2005, when the permaculturalist kind of came up with this term, transition town, and there's been different iterations of community working together since the beginning of humans, but the focus is not, as I said, on oil or not oil. What really percolated out of this whole effort was building community. So whether we're completely solar and it's free or not, and nobody's driving gas combustion engines, isn't so much the point at this juncture as building community, reducing alienation, localizing currency, localizing food supplies, reducing chemical dependency, whether it's chemicals, petroleum in my stretchy clothing or in my shoes, or the chemicals that are going on to the food that we're eating in the big industrial food growing. So it's really, the focus isn't so much on energy at this point. That's a benefit if they have solar cells or geothermal, or they're using a lot of wave energy in the UK, whatever. That's not really the focus. The focus is building a sustainable community. And that community can be physically very close together, or in my example, I lived one county away from Media Transition Town. They were still my community. I still felt like I had my people there, as well as skills and so forth. So I really want to focus on that.
Hi, you mentioned about these faith-based communities where they're trying to get involved in it. I volunteered in New York City at Harlem on a community garden, but I live in Brooklyn, and it's in Harlem. And what my observation is, it's a very good effort, and especially when New York City is giving those community gardens to the local people. But my observation is that it's very ethnically not diverse. Like I was the only, I would say, different ethnic group, person from different ethnic group in that community garden, and I volunteered there. My question is that what, especially given that today we see at Charlottesville, Virginia, what's going on, how do you see the integration of different ethnic communities to be involved in a community to do this kind of work? Can you comment on that?
Sure, absolutely. So I actually had been in Harlem for work, gosh, probably 20 years ago, and it was very frightening. But to see the community-based gardenings coming in and taking over those lots with the broken glass and needles and everything was amazing. As far as ethnically diverse or not ethnically diverse, it really depends on whoever's driving that. In Philadelphia, in the food deserts, in the horrible lots, it was very ethnically diverse. But then I'm up doing work right now within a large nonprofit around 3rd and Harrison in San Francisco, and right behind us is a Filipino garden. It's not ethnically diverse, and it's all senior citizens that are from the Philippines. I love it. It's all good, whether it's diverse or not. There's gardening happening. There's opportunities somewhere for everyone, or you can create that opportunity for diversity. It's up to you. So what is your question? I'm sorry.
Like, how do you get involved, different ethnic, because today...
You make it happen. That was the question, and that's the answer. You can make it happen or pull others together. And again, this last little thing said faith-based community. There's a lot of people here that aren't not tethered to a faith. So just insert whatever you want in there. Humanist communities, or anyone that would have similar interests. It doesn't have to be faith-based at all, of course.
I was just using that as
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to mention a resource. There's the Solar Living Institute in Ukiah, which teaches solar systems, permaculture, cob construction, and a variety of other related small technology on a site that has workshops and classes and such.
Yeah. There's a lot of good stuff, good resources out there. I went through my permaculture design certification a number of years ago, and what happens with people like myself is they might go off and start their own site, and they might even get grants. Cob building, by the way, is using natural building materials, clay, straw, whatever, if you can, on site. So it's pretty cool. But there is a lot of little institutes or teachers out there. But really getting it away from just going and learning is really having this come together in the community, whether people go to a permaculture design certification or workshops or not. You saw very, very simple examples here, and we did in media too. Somebody knew how to knit, somebody knew how to garden, somebody knew how to can food, somebody knew how to create a rope swing, so you don't even have to take classes. But whatever is out there to the greater good is awesome.
Faith is a loaded word, but I have great faith in human beings, and that's what humanists believe in, that we have faith in each other, that we can change the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have kind of an unusual situation in Palo Alto. We have a lot of people moving in, and our neighborhood was previously kind of small 3-bedroom homes that did not occupy very much of the lot, so that you did have room for a garden. And in the last, say, 5 or 10 years, every house that's sold is instantly torn down and replaced by an enormous structure that covers most of the lot, and most of these places appear to have no interest in food gardening. They just want to build the biggest house possible. I mean, there are just some incredibly large houses. Across the street from me, we call it the hotel, because, it could easily accommodate, 15 people, I'm not sure. And it's going on all over Palo Alto?
Yeah, it's going on all over the country, and you can imagine in the Northeast that's been going on for quite some time. We call them McMansions, and whether people have large houses, small houses, if they have a small yard, there's still food production that can be done there, and that hotel owner may not be interested, but there are other people that still might be interested in sharing their yard for a yard-in, as we call it. So there's still hope.
Well, time is up for Q&A, so let's give Marilyn another hand.
Thank you.